Malamud here with you. Zach, what's going on?
Not much. We had that redraft the other day. Very exciting stuff, and can't wait to go through a bunch of picks that went on the other day.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, did get some pretty good players on our team. We're going to break those down in a little bit. Let's get to a couple pieces of news in the NFL, though, before we get into it. First, we have to start with Alvin Kamara. The running back on the New Orleans Saints was suspended 3 games for his role for a fight outside a Las Vegas nightclub in 2022. We also had word that Kareem Hunt was there and visiting. Not quite sure what the impact would be if Kareem Hunt comes in. It's a kind of crowded area there. But then just, in the last hour, we received word that he actually didn't get to work out for the Saints. He got a text from the Indianapolis Colts offering him more money. So therefore he didn't work out and he immediately left. And now he's flying to Indianapolis. He did meet with them, but he didn't actually work out for them. Zach, give us what is the dynasty impact for Kamara, the redraft impact for Kamara, and then we'll get to Kareem Hunt just after this.
Yeah, well, with Kamara, I mean, owners probably pretty happy with just 3 games. I mean, not a crazy amount. There was 6 games that was talked about. Wasn't that big and ended up being a couple games and 3 games in the end. I mean, for Dynasty, if you were thinking about really trading Alvin Kamara, I know maybe age is getting up there a little bit. He's at age 28, has already got a second contract. Like, you can get now like full value for Alvin Kamara when it comes to Dynasty, based on the short suspension that he got. I would say in redraft, he's a mid-tier RB2. He ranks running back 19 right now. He's 47th overall in ESPN rankings. I mean, as a Kamara owner myself in redraft, I'm really not too worried about Kareem Hunt. I know we'll get to that. Kamara, like I said, though, in Dynasty, full value right now for Alvin Kamara, even with maybe a poor season based on expectations last year. But then, like I said, in redraft, he's a mid-tier RB2, knocked a little bit down based on the 3-game suspension that he got.
Yeah, and I think from a redraft perspective, when you figure out 3 games, it's not a bulk of the season. Obviously, playing some of these leagues, they go 12, 13 weeks. That's a quarter of the season, though. And so you do have to factor that in. Right now, he's going around the 4th, 5th, 6th round, depending on which league you're playing in, what the values are, which I think is fair. I don't think that he's going to go higher. I think that some leagues will value him more towards that 4th round now that it's only 3 games. But from a dynasty perspective, I think this is the best case scenario. Kamara was a guy that was being bought a lot throughout the entire league. And, for the sense of teams to have that relief, he's not being suspended for the full year. It's only a couple games. I think that's perfect for him. He still is the number 1 at this moment. There's no real competition. Kendre Miller, I think that takes a little hit, with his value and the impact he might have had right away. That said, I think the biggest hit really comes to the Jamal Williams show. And we talked, that he was the sleeper of this redraft season. I no longer feel that way based on the fact that this is only a 3-game suspension. If it was for the year, we would obviously have a different story.
Yeah, for the year, maybe even like 6 games, I would feel that Jamal Williams would have been a great add in drafts, especially where he was going, 9th, 10th round, around there. And it would have been a steal, in my opinion, to get Jamal Williams. No longer that with Kamara only getting 3 games. I mean, in Dynasty, you look at it, age 28, it depends what your team is really looking for. If you're kind of going for it in Dynasty this year, then you would keep a guy like Alvin Kamara. You'd eat the 3 games because you probably have some running backs that can fill that role on your team. But also Kamara, like if you're looking to trade him, like I said, you get probably full value for this guy. I mean, I know it was a bad season last year. He had 1 good game that boosted up his points like crazy. He had a 40-point game early in the season. But now he has full value with just those 3 games, and should be interesting to see how the first couple of games New Orleans goes through their roster and picks out those running backs the ones that they like, to probably back up Alvin Kamara once he's back.
Yeah, so now let's quickly just jump into this Kareem Hunt thing because it's a little interesting. I'm thinking that the people who drafted Kareem Hunt, if they did, from him, turning down the New Orleans visit, workout, and going to the Colts, where there's the potential that he could end up as the guy if Jonathan Taylor is not there. But even if Jonathan Taylor is there, I still think that there's a role there for him. Not sure it's going to be as big if he stays in New Orleans.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, as a Alvin Kamara now redraft owner, I'm really not worried about Kareem Hunt really at all. I think there's a role for Alvin Kamara, solely Alvin Kamara, and then there's also a role for Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller. I think Kareem Hunt fits right in there with Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller. I don't think really anything more. I mean, you saw him in Cleveland last year. He was behind Nick Chubb and barely did anything. Finished in the 40s of running backs, and ended the season on 10.5% of redraft rosters. Very low percentage. Nobody really had him. There wasn't a lot of belief in him, and that was as the number 2 guy. This guy could be the number 3 guy if Jamal Williams steps in as the 2 in New Orleans. I'm really not worried too much about Kareem Hunt, and I agree with you. It would be a better situation heading to Indy, where there's a lot of question marks, versus now New Orleans, where they have 3 running backs that that they're going to get their opportunities. They're not giving Jamal Williams $12 million over 3 years to sit behind Kareem Hunt as the 3rd guy. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller both are going to have a good role this season.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that, listen, Hunt, he is what he is. We know what he is. If they brought him in for a couple games with Kamara out, that's one thing. I'm not sure how much of an impact solely, alone he would have. I think he's a late round flyer at best on the Saints, whereas I think that he could be one of those later round pickups that you actually would feel more comfortable with if he was a member of the Indianapolis Colts. And again, I just think that it comes down to, we're not really sure what's going on with Jonathan Taylor, injury, or, if he's staying away from contract situation. Like, we're not really sure. And so I think the unknown, that intrigues me more about the value of Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll see what happens maybe in the next couple of days if he signs somewhere.
Yeah. Another guy who's in a crowded room is Rashad Bateman. Head coach John Harbaugh saying that he should be back soon. But Zach, do you think that this is a bounce back season for Rashad Bateman, or do you think it might, be a little bit of a tail off based on just the crowd there?
Yeah, I think it's a tail off this year, just based on, number one, what he did last year, the injury. I mean, it pushed him back, way back, in that Baltimore wide receiver room. It didn't help that in the offseason they add Odell Beckham Jr. and Zay Flowers. He ranks 66 among wide receivers right now. That's way too low. He's really on the border right now of going undrafted in 10-team leagues. I'm probably going to hold on to him in Dynasty. But like I said, Odell and Zay Flowers look like they've moved ahead of him in the wide receiver room. And he's most likely a late round flyer at best in redraft right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is going to be one of those, keep him on waivers. I'm not going to draft him in any of my leagues. I know he went undrafted in our league. And so I also would agree with that. I don't know that he's going to have that much of an impact. And, if he does, then yeah, I'll lay him on waivers, but I'm not going out of my way to draft Rashad Bateman.
Yeah, and Dynasty, just hold him for now. I mean, it's a weird situation, but maybe you're one injury away from then Rashad Bateman going back and moving back up the depth chart at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I agree. So let's just jump to the next point, and it's that Zach Charbonnet, after Pete Carroll comes out and says he could be out a while, out indefinitely was the term, with a shoulder injury. He is back at practice not even 2 days later. Goes back to what we were just talking about on our last episode about Pete Carroll and how he talks to the media, and you can't really buy into that. And so, we're not really sure with the Kenneth Walker thing, though, how bad it is or if it's not bad at all. He hasn't returned right now. Charbonnet, though, practicing by himself. Zach, if Kenneth Walker is not in the lineup, what do you think Charbonnet's value is?
I mean, I think he's top 20, top 15. There's an argument around top 15 for that. Just based on this run heavy offense, they really love to pound the ball, and Zach Charbonnet would be the number one guy clearly. I know DJ Dallas is there. They probably have a couple more backs behind them, but it's really Zach Charbonnet's backfield if Kenneth Walker misses time. Right now, I don't think the strategy changes for me. Walker's week to week, but we're still 6 weeks away from the regular season, so we still have a lot of time from that. 5 weeks away from the regular season, so a lot of time there. I think Walker probably will be back for week 1, but I'm staying away from Walker. I told you I don't think the value where he's being drafted is worth it at that time. I would draft Charbonnet in the later rounds, take a late round flyer on him where he's going. But Walker, I'm staying away from. Like I said, the strategy doesn't really change. But if Kenneth Walker is ruled out for a bit of the regular season, Zach Charbonnet should shoot up draft boards.
So we spoke about it a couple weeks ago on our Dynasty Breakdown episode. I picked Zach Charbonnet at the back end of the first round. We'll give a little foreshadowing. I have Kenneth Walker on my team, and I went out of my way to make sure that I protected that asset. To give a little hint of what's going to come later in the show. But I do agree. I think that Charbonnet is a workhorse back. If Kenneth Walker is not there, I think they work in tandem if they're together. I also agree with you. I think that it's kind of early right now in the preseason where they don't want to rush their guys back from injury. And so therefore they're going to take their time. We saw it with Aaron Rodgers during OTAs where they were like, okay, well, he's kind of he got a bruise. And so therefore we're going to take him out for the whole week of practice because we're not going to risk anything. I think that you're going to see that at least now for the next week or two as we head into the first preseason game when a lot of guys haven't played, that kind of a speed. And so, you don't really want to ramp your guys up so much. We'll see some of the guys play a couple series here and there. But I don't know that you'll really see much action until we get to that third game, if not the second game.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like I said, I mean, Walker, week to week, there's still a question mark. We can never trust Pete Carroll, though. We don't really know the full time frame for Walker, and most likely we'll know more about it soon.
Yeah, so we'll wait and see on that. We jump into another news here, and it was the Detroit Lions who signed a quarterback. They signed Teddy Bridgewater to a 1-year deal. Zach, does this have any dynasty impact for Hendon Hooker?
I mean, I think it tells you everything you already knew about Hendon Hooker. This is a project in Detroit. It's going to start with him sitting and learning behind Jared Goff. Even if Jared Goff needs to miss a game or two, it's going to be Teddy Bridgewater most likely who steps in and fills that role. And he can learn as well from a guy like Teddy Bridgewater throwing next to him. But like I said, with Hendon Hooker, expect at least 2, 3, maybe 4 years on the bench. That's how it's going to be developing, especially Goff's he's only 28 years old. He's got a lot of time left at quarterback. I wouldn't think Detroit's rushing away from Jared Goff anytime soon, especially with the roster that they've built. I think this is a project with Hendon Hooker, and you're going to have to wait a while. Now, Teddy Bridgewater proves that by coming in this year.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that the key to this is that it is a 1-year deal so that they can develop Hendon Hooker. And you weren't really expecting Hendon Hooker, but it was also a big sign he's not ready to come into an NFL game in the case that Jared Goff is hurt. And so for me, I don't know that it impacts it much. I think that you kind of know what you're getting yourself into if you picked Hendon Hooker in your dynasty draft. That said, I do like the Bridgewater move because it's a veteran quarterback who has been on an NFL field. He's a good passer, which I think is one of the qualities that he doesn't really get a lot of credit for. And it's going to end up being that running back tandem that we'll get to, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. And, you and I were lucky enough to each draft one of those two guys in our redraft league. And so I think it's going to be a lot of that. While using the receivers that they have. But I'm not sure how many deep shots that this team will take. And so in the case that Bridgewater does come in, I think that it's a good move.
Yeah, and just quickly, Bridgewater playing with Hooker, obviously Jared Goff gets the first team reps and all that stuff. It's good to have a guy like Bridgewater next to Hendon Hooker so he can stand there and learn from him while Jared Goff gets the first team reps and leads the team out this year.
Yeah, extremely good move there for Detroit, and I think that for at least for this year, it's a good move just for the sense of the team for one season as opposed to 5 seasons. So we jump into some other rookie news here. CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson are getting the bulk of the first team reps. Stroud, he was announced as the starter for the preseason game that's coming up on Thursday. Zach, first let's talk about that. And then we'll jump over to his backup now, what seems to be his backup, Davis Mills. So first, let's start off with Stroud here. Preseason starter, what are you looking for as the first game if you own him? And then do you think that this ups his value at all from a redraft perspective?
I don't think so. I mean, you look, Stroud's at a mid to low end QB3 to start the season. If you drafted him in Dynasty, it's probably because you needed a quarterback, but you can't be expecting top 12 numbers in year one. It's not going to be up there, especially with the team around him. A really bad offensive line last year, poor receiving group, both in Indy and Houston. You can't expect either of these guys, Richardson or Stroud, to really be in that top echelon of quarterbacks. Maybe top 15, they sneak into there, but anything more than that, I'd be really surprised.
Yeah, for me, I think that for Stroud's perspective, you take a look at the redraft side. He's a late round flyer for me. Just, I think that if you have a quarterback, he's obviously not a quarterback 1. He's probably not even a quarterback 2, but he's a low end quarterback 2 at best, I think right now. And listen, the running ability, I think that they figured out that he can run late in his college career. I think they're going to start to utilize that a little bit as well, especially as he starts to go into Houston. And the protection's great over in Houston, but at the same time, like the receivers might not be, all world. And so I think that's the kind of thing, putting him into the first game, I think that's just more of trying to get him comfortable playing in the NFL, working at that speed. Again, game speed is different than practice speed. And so I think it's exposing him to that a bit. Jumping into the Davis Mills thing, from a dynasty perspective, he's only 23. So if you have him on your team, it's kind of depends on your league. Some leagues have, up to 20 guys. Some leagues have up to 30 guys on your roster. So I think it's more league dependent. But he's a guy I would either hold or drop right now, depending on if you're in a more shallow league, you probably can let him go. If you're in one of those medium leagues, though, I think I would hold him right now because his age is really something that, I would be intrigued by.
That's fair, but I mean, my argument against that is I don't know where he's going to end up going. He was the quarterback of the Houston Texans, who were not great last year. They finished really towards the bottom of the league. I don't know if any team's really saying, okay, I'm going to grab Davis Mills to be my starting quarterback. You never know, but right now I'm comfortable saying you can drop him in a dynasty league. You probably have a couple of better options on your roster, I think, because I mean, with Stroud in there now, it basically proves that he's the guy. They're going to ride with him. Even if he's in a slump, they're probably still going to ride with him because he's their number 1. I think that's what you have to look at. I don't think Davis Mills is going to get a lot of time in the next couple of years, especially if Stroud starts to roll and get comfortable in the NFL. I would say it's comfortable probably to drop Davis Mills. I understand the age, but I just don't know if there's a team right now that you're going to say, oh, he can slot in the future.
Yeah, it's fair. And that's why I say I think that it really just comes down to how many players you have on your league. If it's a super flex, if it's a one quarterback, get rid of him. I don't know that he makes any sense for a roster. If you're in one of those really deep super flex leagues, then you might want to hold him just at the end of your roster. One of those like 30 roster player leagues, that makes sense. But yeah, I think in the more shallow leagues, yeah, I agree with you. I think it would be fair to drop.
Yeah, I completely agree.
All right, so now we jump into Anthony Richardson's impact. And Zach, I think he's going to be the starter. I think that he's gotten every opportunity to work with the ones. And, it's only a matter of time before that announcement's made.
Yeah, I mean, and we spoke about this on the side, Brett. I think it would have been a disaster if they didn't have him as a starter. I think they're going to be super bad this year towards the bottom of the NFL. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. Their defense has been pretty bad the last couple of years. Their offense was horrendous last year. Yes, you can see maybe improvement on the offensive line that had maybe the worst years of their careers, each of those guys. And it's a poor receiving group. It's not there's nobody that really stands out. Yes, Michael Pittman, but you see on fantasy rankings, he's in the back end of the 30s. Like he's very low this year. Not somebody that you're going to be like, oh, I can rely on him each and every week. Richardson, in my mind, he's a low-end QB2, high-end QB3. I understand that people are excited to have him as a backup, but I think you're going to only play him 1 week. I think that's going to be it from a redraft perspective. I wouldn't feel comfortable if my quarterback went down. I'd say, oh, Anthony Richardson, he's my starter now. I think there's better options on the waiver wire than Anthony Richardson. I understand the rushing value and the mobility as a quarterback, but he's super young, super raw, still a lot of time. The accuracy was his one problem. And obviously, it's not going to just change all of a sudden within a year. I think that takes a little bit of time and getting used to, especially in the NFL versus college. Right now, I'd put him a low-end QB2, high-end QB3. I'm not expecting some spectacular season like some other people are with top 15, maybe top 12 numbers. I'm not there just yet on Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting. From a dynasty perspective, I think that knowing he is the starter, I'm an owner of Anthony Richardson. And I think knowing he's going to be the starter, that's a great thing because you got picked that high in the draft, and to sit for a while would be, a waste. But that said, I really think that it's starting to, culminate with him taking the ones and that Gardner Minshew role immediately, like he's getting all the backup reps. And so that for me really made me feel comfortable as an owner. From a redraft perspective, though, yeah, I agree with you. I think that, I'm not drafting him unless he's my backup and I have a solid option as the top guy. That would be the only case where I really see that Richardson's going to be that. I'm not sure that he'll get the top 12 numbers that a lot of these people are saying. I do believe he'll be a good quarterback too. And there will be some rushing upside, but at the same time, I'm not sure how much. And I do agree with you, especially if Jonathan Taylor is not there and whatever happens with that situation, I'm not sure that the Colts are going to be great this year.
Yeah, and just looking quickly at Richardson, he's ranked 17th right now. I mean, that's ahead of Kenny Pickett, Jared Goff. I mean, guys that I'd probably pick over Richardson right now as my backup quarterback because I know their offenses will work a lot smoother than the offense up in Indy.
Yeah, solid. And I agree with those guys. And those guys are solid quarterbacks. And so I agree with you. I would take those guys over Richardson right now, especially in a redraft league.
Yep.
All right, so jump into the last point we have here in the news. And it's that Dak Prescott is talking extension with the Dallas Cowboys. Zach, we've seen a lot of quarterbacks get paid. Dak might get paid now by the Cowboys. Does this have an impact, though, on his dynasty perspective? The guy is 30 years old, and he turned 30 years old just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, Dak Prescott and I have kind of now a love-hate relationship. He's on my never draft again list in redraft. We had a little bit of problems last year. I drafted him as my starting quarterback. Not doing that again. He was the only player in NFL history to miss 5 or more games and still lead the league in interceptions. He's a QB2 in my mind this year. There's a lot of people ranking him in the top 10, 9, 10 in that range. I'm not one of those people. I'd put a guy like Kirk Cousins ahead of him to round out my top 10 just because I know what I'm getting from a guy like Kirk Cousins. Dak, it's kind of a toss-up every single year. It's a good year. It's a bad year. Will he get injured? Will he not? I mean, with Kirk Cousins, I know what I'm getting, especially with Justin Jefferson healthy at receiver. When it comes to the Cowboys, they might have offensive line problems this year. I think I just see better options on the board in redraft. And looking at Dynasty, I don't know if you feel great with him as your starting quarterback after what he did last year. The floor is there. You definitely know that. He's probably going to be no less than top 18. I would say he was 18 last year. So you know that he's probably going to be any range higher than that. But that's a QB2 range. I mean, you want to maybe grab a guy who's a little bit higher than that. But like I said, the floor is there. They want to run the ball more. And with Pollard there, you're expecting that number to go up, especially with just Pollard there and Zeke maybe not coming back. But with Dak, if you're expecting top 9, top 10 fantasy numbers, I don't know if it's the guy that you're looking for this year.
Yeah, so Dak Prescott, forgive me, I do own you in Dynasty. The first couple games of the year, he was horrendous. Just before the injury, he just was. He was awful. The year before he was injured, and he had that gruesome ankle injury, and then he comes into this year and he banged his finger on the guy's helmet, and that caused an entire debacle to his season. I'm sure he would have finished higher than quarterback 18 had he played some of those games. And I also believe that him being injured allowed him to actually get right and figure out, hey, this is what went wrong. Because again, those first couple performances were not good. That said, I think in some sort of stability by the fact that he will remain on the Cowboys. So I'm not sure if this is a boost in dynasty value because again, he is 30. But I don't know that this is a decline. I think that this is just, stable and I don't think it goes down or up. I really just, I have no effect either way, knowing that he'll be on the Cowboys. That said, I'm comfortable that it is on the Cowboys, one of those teams that has a guy like a CeeDee Lamb that it'll be there for a while. I think that that's really going to help him as well as having Tony Pollard on his team.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, you know the floor is there. He's going to be top 20 every single year. You know that. That's 100%, especially in this offense. It's a matter of where he's going to go and can he stay healthy in that offense. And that's still an answer that we're waiting for, especially heading into this year after a couple of injuries the last couple.
Yeah. The last I'll just is he is 30, and so there is that kind of plateau before the cliff. And so, listen, if you want to get off the Dak Prescott ride in Dynasty, that's okay. And no fault for, wanting to get value on a guy like that, especially in one of those super flex leagues where quarterbacks are worth more. I'm going to ride the wave this year with Dak. But I wouldn't fault you if you were one of those owners who was like, okay, he's 30. It's going to go all downhill from here. And I need to get off now.
Yeah, Brett, let's head into our redraft from the other day.
Yeah, so we jump in right here, and let's start with the first round here. Yours truly, we broke the news last week. I had the first pick, and it was Christian McCaffrey. I mean, there was a debate of McCaffrey or Jefferson, and that debate went on for about a couple of days for me, just kind of looking at where it might lay out. And if I did pick Jefferson, how would any sort of second, third, fourth round look for me? And it was scary. I mean, I knew that this league, this is one of those leagues that we're in that very heavily favors the running back. On top of the fact that you and I spoke about it last week about how quickly, the running back top echelon is going to go. And so with the combo of it, you see it right there. I ended up grabbing one in round 4. It was Kenneth Walker. And, for me, it just kind of came down to I need some sort of stability. So I went with Christian McCaffrey. I think that for me, it was just trying to have that workhorse back. And for you, I think you could speak to your pick the same way.
Yeah, I mean, my pick is based on it was Bijan, and obviously the ceiling is super high. It could go through the moon this year, heading into this year, especially in that Atlanta offense. And I talked about the running backs. I favor running backs very heavily this year, especially just based on I don't think there's a lot of them and a lot of top echelon guys that you can really rely on at the running back position heading into this season. I think there's a ton of wide receivers and they're going to be able to fall into your lap. I favor running backs, and trying to grab them early is my goal heading into each and every draft.
Yeah, so we break down the first round now. Justin Jefferson going second. Jamar Chase is the third pick. Eckler going fourth. And then Bijan, you end up taking Bijan. Travis Kelce. So Kelsey's there at number 6. Let's just break down this pick because you and I spoke about it a little bit. Kelce versus Kupp and what the value is there. Overtaking another running back. Just explain, like, you agreed that Kelce should be the right pick at that spot, correct?
Yeah, completely. I think you know what you're getting. You know exactly what you're getting. It's not going to change. You know that Travis Kelce is going to be the number 1 tight end this year. And you know that he's going to just have his way in that Kansas City offense. He's the target. There was always questions with Tyreek there of, will Kelce be the number 1? Will he get a ton of targets? Now there's Travis Kelce and a bunch of receivers that you can take your pick on who you want each week. Travis Kelce's the guy. He's the guy in that receiving room. He's basically a wide receiver. I think this is a fantastic pick at number 6. I think that's great value. There's an argument that Travis Kelce could be going in the top 3. And people can make that argument. Definitely. I think 6 is a good spot for him and a really strong pick, middle of the first round.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the gap between, tight end 1 and tight end 2. I think that the value really is there just based on what is the floor for a tight end in general and what is the floor for Travis Kelce. You have an absolute advantage at that position. So, yeah, no fault to Josh M right there because I think that was the right pick as well. Continuing through the first round, though, we get Kupp, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, and Tyreek Hill. Wrapping back around, we have Nick Chubb, and that forms a good partnership there. Let's just talk about that one really quick. Nick Chubb and Tyreek Hill, 2 solid guys, and you love Nick Chubb, so just break it down a little bit.
So it's pretty funny. In this other league that I'm in, I have Tyreek Hill. I grabbed him in the first round with the 8th pick, and then I grabbed Nick Chubb on the other way around. Nick Chubb went a little bit earlier in this one, 2 picks higher than that at number 11, and I think it's a great pick. Nick Chubb, you know what you're getting each and every year, and especially now heading into this year, no Kareem Hunt, it's just Nick Chubb, and he can do whatever he wants with Deshaun Watson at quarterback. They're going to give him the ball. He's going to have a blast at the running back position because he has really no pressure on him right now in Cleveland. You know what you're going to get from Nick Chubb, and he's the most consistent running back in my mind in fantasy football.
Yeah, so we continue through here. Devontae Adams, and then it goes Garrett Wilson. And this was one of those picks that made our room kind of go, ooh. And, but I think that Garrett Wilson has the potential that he could end up as one of those first rounders next year, just based on the fact that Aaron Rodgers is feeding him the ball now.
So Garrett Wilson went wide receiver 6 in this league. I think he could be in the top 5. There's no doubt the ceiling is very high, especially heading into this year with Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, all those years, the relationship with Devontae Adams, I think he can easily build that with Garrett Wilson. And Wilson has the tools, has the abilities, has the talent to be in the top 5 in fantasy wide receivers. It's a good pick. Go get your guy if you think he's going to be great. Especially in the second round, it's not like reaching up in the first round. Second round, that's a really good spot for him.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, at the end of the day, he's not going to get the target that Justin Jefferson's getting, but, he could. I don't know that Cooper Kupp's going to repeat that performance that he got with those targets. So I think that there's a chance that Wilson ends up finishing even higher than Kupp. I don't know that that's that much of a stretch just based on the uncertainty going on with the team in LA. I agree with the pick there. And I think this is going to be a really big year and a really big step forward for Garrett Wilson to kind of cement himself as one of those upper echelon wide receivers.
Yeah. And it's just with Aaron Rodgers, like I said, building that chemistry. There's probably not too many better duos than Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson heading into this year.
So let's break down these next 2 picks. And these are 2 guys who fell from the first round from last year. And, we're not really sure on either one of them. of where they could have gone, and they both go here back to back. Jonathan Taylor and Josh Jacobs going 14 and 15. Zach, do you agree with the spot here?
I mean, I talked about it last week. Jonathan Taylor, the only spot I would really feel comfortable taking him is if I was towards the end of the second round and then was able to back it up with another running back or grabbing a running back early. I think probably a good spot for somebody who needed a running back like Ryan did. He grabbed the guy that has the potential to be really, really good, but there's so many question marks right now. I wouldn't feel too comfortable right now, especially with Taylor not at practice, not at training camp. He's not doing anything. He's standing on the sidelines right now in Indy, and if that's the case, I'd take my chances on other guys around him.
Yeah, and actually today, they announced Jonathan Taylor's not with the team. He stepped away with injury or contract. We're not really sure, but he did step away, and they kind of undisclosed it, which was a little weird. Something to monitor there from at least the Taylor perspective. But the Josh Jacobs factor with the next pick, I think this one really comes down to kind of what you just said. He got the pass catcher at what number is that? 6. And so now he has to go get a running back. And I think that's the guy that you're going to get there in Josh Jacobs. And listen, there's a potential that he comes back week 1, he's ready to go, and he finishes as one of those guys who's the first round. I think that's good value there.
Definitely. I mean, you're backing up a guy in Kelsey who's going to put up a ton of points this year. You know it. With a guy in Josh Jacobs who has the potential, if he's healthy and on the field, can he get to that level in the first round? I definitely think he can. His ceiling's very high. It's just a matter of him coming back and not holding out in Vegas. Still a question mark there. I think he'll end up being there week 1. So definitely a good pick midway through the second round.
Yeah, and hopefully he is a guy who, stayed in shape while he was away from this. We've seen players hold out over the years and come back and not be great. I think back to Darrelle Revis all those years ago, and, he came back and he was, about 60% of what his performance level was. And so you hope that a guy like Josh Jacobs can perform what he was. I'm sure he's working out the regular workouts that they would be giving him. So I'm not really worried from that perspective, but it is, again, something to keep an eye on. Zach, take us through your next pick, though. You picked Stefon Diggs there.
I mean, this was probably the easiest pick of the draft. I was a little bit surprised, I'm not going to lie, that he fell all the way to midway through the second round. 16th overall. I would have taken that. I would have taken that any day of the week. He fell. I think he's probably ranked right behind Tyreek Hill as maybe wide receiver 5 heading into this season. That's in my mind. He went wide receiver 7 instead, and I'll grab him any day of the week. It's very easy. A reliable pass catcher up in Buffalo. He's going to get his points. The floor is obviously there, and the ceiling could be maybe up to wide receiver 1. We never know, especially in that offense with Josh Allen. Easiest pick of the draft, like I said, Brett.
Yeah, I think that the fact that the running backs went in the first round and guys started to go get their wides, I think that there were more pass catchers, though, than we expected in the first round. So therefore, kind of laid out that, these teams needed running backs in the second round. And that kind of helped your favor. Stefon Diggs falling to you. I like the pick. I think that, when we talk redraft, Stefon Diggs is pretty reliable. The whole issue that he had during OTAs and he was back within a day, I don't buy that there was any sort of riff. I think that he's going to score a lot of touchdowns this year. And yeah, I think that I really was expecting him to go at that front end of the second round, if not the back end of the first round. But he falls there, and that's a great landing spot for you. Bijan and Stefon Diggs, you can't really go wrong there. And we'll break down your next pick too, and you can't really go wrong with your third round pick. But continuing through the draft, CeeDee Lamb goes next, followed by Tony Pollard. And then it was Amon-Ra St. Brown, followed by my pick of A.J. Brown. Listen, I was projecting who would be there at the end of round 2. We talked last week. There was the potential that Jonathan Taylor would have ended up in that spot. There was the potential that Garrett Wilson would end up in that spot. And then it came to the pick right before me, and I was kind of comfortable with picking between Amon-Ra and A.J. I end up getting A.J., and that's okay. Listen, he had 11 touchdowns last year. He had just shy of 1,500 yards. I think it's going to be more of the same for him. They keep talking about building the chemistry between him and Jalen Hurts. I'm not sure there could be even more chemistry than there already was. The two of them seemed like they were pretty in sync. But what do you think of that one?
Yeah, I mean, A.J. Brown, there's people ranking him ahead of guys like CeeDee Lamb and Garrett Wilson this year already. A.J. Brown had a fantastic year last year. Nothing tells me that can't happen again heading into this season with Jalen Hurts at the quarterback position. And I think it's a really good pick that he fell all the way down to you at pick 20. I mean, I think it's a steal at that point to get a wide receiver like that in A.J. Brown.
Yeah, I was pretty excited with it. I think that, again, I was trying to figure out, listen, is there going to be some running backs there or wides there? All the running backs kind of went early, and so I settled for AJ. I think that was, for me, it was a good spot knowing that, I could then take a quarterback there at 3, and the pick was Patrick Mahomes. I spoke about it last week about the value of quarterbacks compared to the rest. One of our league mates actually pointed out there was 9.5 points per game between Patrick Mahomes and Trevor Lawrence. That's a big deal. That's the difference between a win and a loss each week. And so to be able to have that advantage of getting Pat Mahomes, and again, you get those primetime games, you get those 40-point games. I love having that kind of guy. And so it was pretty easy for me to pick Pat Mahomes there, knowing also that I was able to have a running back, a wide receiver, and a quarterback there in round 3, not have to worry about, what guy might fall to me at the back end in the 4 and 5 turn. I was comfortable there taking the quarterback.
Yeah, and a guy like Pat Mahomes, he's going to be gone most likely by the time it gets back around to you, Brett. So if you're comfortable getting your guy and getting that top quarterback, definitely go after it. And you did that with Pat Mahomes, first pick of the 3rd round.
Yeah, so now we keep going through the draft here, and it was Waddle, Olave, and Devonta Smith. And then, Zach, you took a quarterback as well.
I did. I mean, I'm not somebody who always is going to take a quarterback middle of the 3rd round. I kind of wait and see who's there, but I just could not pass up this opportunity. I have Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen's on the board. I didn't think Josh Allen would be back there by the time I made my next pick. Shout out to Charlie. He definitely 100% would have taken Josh Allen at that pick as he's taken him every single year. So I grabbed Josh Allen and I build a stack with him and Stephon Diggs. I got double the points now for the top QB wide receiver duo up in Buffalo. I think that's a really solid start to my team, adding it to a guy like Bijan Robinson, whose ceiling, like I said, could go through the roof.
Yeah, and again, I think it comes down to, yes, you have your stack, and it's great, but knowing what your league mates are going to do, knowing their likes, their dislikes, I think that's really important. And knowing that Josh Allen was not going to be there for you in round 4, I think that really is the thing that people should take out from this. Knowing that Josh Allen's not going to be there, so get him now. I think that was a really smart pick by you there. And then, of course, you had a running back, a wide receiver, and a quarterback as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I know we're going to move towards the next pick a little bit soon, but obviously there was that stretch right after Josh Allen that was the risk. I get Josh Allen and I get the stack, but I then miss out on maybe one of those running backs that I would have liked. There's a big stretch of them there if you want to go through them, Brett.
Yeah, and so this was an interesting stretch because there were 5 straight guys there at the back end of the 3rd round, and I think that a lot of leagues you're going to start to see that where, that running back now is becoming running back, just because of the value that the wide receivers are bringing in. You see a couple teams there that had that. And so it was Aaron Jones, Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Joe Mixon, and then Breece Hall ends up going in the back end of the 3rd round. And Zach, we spoke about him and the Dalvin impact and what could happen there. But I think this is good value at the 3-4 turn for Breece, granted that, Breece comes back healthy.
Yeah, it's a risk. Obviously, Breece coming back healthy and the question mark if Dalvin Cook's going to sign. obviously you got to keep a look at that, but he does have Breece Hall as his running back too. And it's not like he grabbed him as his top running back. He's not in really a hole with that. Obviously, maybe could have added a couple more after that, but then he has Nick Chubb at the top, and you know where you're going to get. And he also added those wide receivers to try and make up for those points, maybe if Breece Hall is out for some time.
Yeah, agree. And I think that the fact that he had already had a running back there, it makes it a little more palatable where you grab a guy like Breece and listen, if he pops, then that's great. And if he doesn't pop, well, later in the draft, he protects him by grabbing some more running backs. We'll kind of show you that later on as we break down the rest of our picks after round 5. But yeah, listen, the next turn, it was 3 straight running back, or it was 3 straight wides, 4 out of 5 picks, including a tight end there. So breaking it down, it was Deebo Samuel, Keenan Allen, DK Metcalf, TJ Hawkinson, and then it was T. Higgins. So, Zach, that set you up to then go get that running back that you were talking about just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I wanted a running back. I obviously, like I said, I favor running backs this year, and getting those guys early is my goal in redrafts, especially with how many of them go so quickly. And that stretch of 5, I would have probably taken 4 of the 5 guys if they were available to me in the next round. But obviously they go, and Jahmyr Gibbs ends up dropping to me. I have Jahmyr Gibbs in another redraft league. I mean, he's going to have a role in Detroit. He's going to be the number 1 in Detroit. Obviously, David Montgomery is going to get a ton of rushing stats and put up a lot of points this year. But I still think Gibbs is the number 1 guy, and they're going to roll through him while David Montgomery will get those goal line carries and all of that other stuff. But the big plays and out of the backfield receiving, definitely Jahmyr Gibbs needs to be towards the upper part of the draft when it comes to the receiving backs out of the backfield.
Yeah, so then you pick Gibbs. I mean, we spoke about him the last couple of weeks of the impact that he's going to have. And yeah, he's going to have a lot of fantasy points. David Montgomery, you see it there on the screen. I grabbed him later in the draft. We'll break that down in just a minute. But from the Gibbs perspective, I think he's going to be a monster this year. So I think that that's great value for you in the middle of the 4th. That's the guy that I was particularly looking at grabbing there in the 4th had he fallen to me. But then those next couple picks were a little stressful for me because, you had Ramondre Stevenson, and I kind of had my eye on him. Calvin Ridley, I had my eye on him. And Mark Andrews, I was going to pick him up until it was picked the right before me. So, when your targets start to go off the board, you kind of get that little panic a bit. And all of a sudden I was forced to kind of pivot where I was picking, I wanted to grab at least, I wanted to grab Mark Andrews with one of those 2 picks. And then I was going to probably grab one of those 2 running backs. But, Gibbs and Stevenson go there. I'm forced to settle for Kenneth Walker. And listen, we spoke about Kenneth Walker. The upside's there. There's also the downside, though. And it's with Zach Charbonnet. And Charbonnet coming in really limits the ceiling for me for Kenneth Walker, which is why, we'll break it down in a bit. But I did also have to protect him by getting Charbonnet. Kenneth Walker, though, he stood as the running back 8 after the injury or after Rashad Penny's injury. And if you remove the 2 games that he missed in weeks 13, 14, he averaged 16.4 fantasy points per game, which would have placed him as the running back 8. There is a lot of talent in there. However, again, the Charbonnet thing really does scare me. So this was a scary pick to make. But at the same time, it really pivoted my strategy to, okay, I'm going to grab the running back here, but then later on, I'm going to have to protect those assets and grab some guys that, in the case that Kenneth Walker's ceiling isn't that high, there's the potential that you can protect him with some other running backs.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. And you were able to do that. Obviously, you see David Montgomery on the bottom of the list. We'll talk about that. But getting some guys behind him, give him a little bit of a cushion right behind there in Kenneth Walker, who we're a little bit worried about heading into this year. But being able to back him up just makes your not your wide receiver room, your running back room, look comfortable and you're able to work with it, even drafting Kenneth Walker in the 4th round.
Yeah. And so, now knowing that Kenneth Walker was the pick, and Mark Andrews was not there on the board, it made it kind of easy for me to look at D-Hop and say, okay, this is going to be a solid wide receiver 2 who could potentially put up wide receiver 1 numbers just based on the fact that there's nobody around him. And for me, that made that pick easy. I was excited to pick Hopkins at that spot.
Yeah, and it was a great pick right there. I have DeAndre Hopkins in another league as my wide receiver 2. I mean, your wide receiver room is set up perfectly with 2 guys who can really be strong this year as the number ones in their offense.
Yeah, especially in the years where these couple seasons where the running backs are, very top heavy. The wides, there's a ton of points though to be had in those middle rounds. I think this is where you see that, and then we'll break down my next pick in a bit, but you see I took another receiver there. But continuing through this 5th round, it was Rashad White, then it was James Conner, then it was Darren Waller. Zach, give us your thoughts on Darren Waller just as a player and what impact he could potentially have with the Giants, and whether you think this is good value here.
I think it's good value. In the 5th round, I mean, it could be a little bit early for where I would feel comfortable taking a guy like Waller. Obviously, I've had my disagreements with Waller being that high in the past. I think looking at the Giants' room at receiver, obviously Darren Waller is going to be the number 1 option as the tight end. I think Waller now heading into this year, you got to hope that the injuries don't come back. From what they were in Las Vegas, and that ended up shipping him out of Las Vegas. But the Giants are very high on Darren Waller. It seems that he's going to end up being, like I said, that number 1 pass catcher. And it's a good value to try and grab the tight end. It might be a little bit early, like I said, from where I'd grab him, but he's the number 4 tight end and probably wouldn't have been there on the way back.
Yeah, and, again, this is the injury concern. And so for me, listen, it's good value just based on the fact that, like you just said, he wouldn't have been there for you on the way back. This team actually protected later in the draft picking Dalton Kincaid. And I think that was a really good move because, there is the potential that Kincaid takes off. But at the same time, it almost protects your asset here in Waller in the case that he doesn't stay healthy.
Yeah, definitely.
So now we break down right to the next pick. And Zach, you took Alvin Kamara. So tell us a little bit about this. This was right after the suspension news had come out. So you take Kamara there in the 5th. What went through your head?
So I didn't look at any rankings or anything of Kamara after the suspension was put in place for 3 games. I was just in my mind thinking, if I can get Alvin Kamara as my 3rd running back, he's only missing 3 games. Like, if I can get him as the 3rd running back around there, I'll take that any day. I think this is a perfect spot for him. I said before he's ranked 47th, so I took him at 45th. I think that's good value right there and where he's supposed to be going. And then I have Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson ahead of him. And if Alvin Kamara gets a normal season now, then I have 3 really strong running backs. I could probably even push Kamara ahead of Gibbs into my running back 2 spot. I thought after the 3 games were settled, I'd probably be comfortable taking him in that 5th, 6th, 7th round. I grabbed him in the 5th because I didn't think he would be there otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, we just spoke about it just a few minutes ago. I think that once that suspension was handed down, the ADP on Alvin Kamara was going to go up. And so, yeah, I think that you kind of had to grab him there just based on the fact of you start looking at some of the running backs that are right there around him. Miles Sanders, James Conner, Rashad White, see Javonte just around later. It comes to a point where somebody would have said, okay, well, wait, Kamara is only suspended 3 games. I'll take the chance on those 3 games and take him for the rest of the year. So I agree with the pick at that spot. I think there's a lot of high upside. And again, just like you said, there's not a lot of risk because you have Gibbs, you have Bijan, so he's your 3rd option with the potential that he pops.
Exactly, and I was able to back him up a little bit more with a running back behind him and Antonio Gibson, and that made it the running back room really comfortable. I have a lot of options there, and it's not just Kamara. If he has a bad year, I still have guys to back it up.
Yeah, so breaking down the rest of this 5th round here, We see Miles Sanders go, followed by Jerry Jeudy, Alexander Madison, and then it was Jalen Hurts. And we saw that big gap here in quarterbacks between that first two and then that next group. There's a bit of a gap, though, between Jalen Hurts and the following guys. Do you agree with that pick here?
I do, especially with the team in Charlie who's on the back end of a round and doesn't have another pick for a real long while after that. Just quickly, I do want to say Jerry Jeudy at the back end of the 5th round, steal in my mind. I think it's a really big steal to get a guy who's going to be the wide receiver 1. And we talked about, the value of these wide receivers. Jerry Jeudy at the back end of the 5th round, I think in my mind is a really good pick to be able to get him that late. But back to Jalen Hurts, I think for a team who needed a quarterback and Jalen Hurts is still on the board at the back end of the 5th, I'd take that any day of the week. You and me, we value the quarterback position a little bit more than others in fantasy. Jalen Hurts, if I knew he was dropping that far, maybe we would have stayed back a little bit to try and grab him.
Yeah, and Hurts dropping into the 5th, and you might have waited the extra round. That said, I think that Mahomes and Allen are king. I'm not sure that those two guys would have been there in that 4th round. Somebody probably would have taken them by that point.
That's probably true, but I feel like Hurts now you're going to put him in the conversation with those top 3. I like you would favor Mahomes and Allen over Hurts because I've just seen it for a couple more years. Obviously, Hurts had a fantastic year last year, and I think he's most likely going to replicate that. But I feel more comfortable with the other two. Not saying this is a bad pick, but I would take the other two in Mahomes and Allen over Hurts this year.
Yeah, agree. And I again, at that 5-6 turn, I think that picking the quarterback at that spot, if you want to get that upper echelon quarterback, I can't fault him for that. I thought that was a really good pick there. But as we start to go break down just the rest of our picks, Zach, just take us through your Christian Watson pick.
So I needed a wide receiver. Obviously, I had 3 running backs, 1 wide receiver, and the quarterback in Josh Allen. Needed to start adding to the receiver group. I was between a couple guys. There was really, I would say, a bit of a lull stretch of receivers where I was picking. McLaurin got picked right before, and Godwin got picked before. I was on Christian Watson of those 3 the entire time and see the value. Obviously, Jordan Love, there's a ton of question marks, but the rest of the Green Bay Packers are really, really good. Don't sleep on them in real football with just based on the young quarterback in Jordan Love. I think with Watson, there's value there. At the 6th round and middle of the 6th round, he's the number 1 wide receiver on the Packers this year. I think he's going to probably not do what he did towards the later stages of last season, but I think it's going to be a comfortable amount of fantasy points that made me feel comfortable taking him in the middle of the 6th round.
Yeah, so for me now with my 2 picks there, I was on the turn. It was just about building that depth. I knew I wanted to grab a running back at that spot. Wasn't exactly comfortable taking one of the Pacheco, Swift, Cooks of there. Felt like I might have needed another pass catcher just to kind of protect the asset there. I saw Drake London sitting there, so that was awesome. I really was looking at Javonte, who got picked the pick right before me. Think there's going to be a big year for Javonte, especially if he's completely healthy now. So was a little bummed about that. But I did get a guy that I'm very high on this year. That's David Montgomery. Was able to snatch him up at the start of the 7th, and it really just comes down to there's going to be co-starters, and for them to come out and say that him and Gibbs are going to be co-starters this year, I think that really holds a lot of value for me, and I really think that there's going to be a lot of touchdowns. And we spoke about it a few weeks ago. There's a potential that he scores more than Gibbs or just as many points as Gibbs does from a fantasy perspective. So I was pretty comfortable taking that, especially when I was a little iffy on the Kenneth Walker pick.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, Brett, you took my pick. Obviously, our league in a standard 10-team PPR, just 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a flex. Obviously, I wanted David Montgomery to make me feel a little bit more comfortable on Jahmyr Gibbs. And it was a good pick in the end by you, Brett, to grab Montgomery because you mentioned that 2-headed monster that Detroit keeps talking about. Those two guys are going to share the workload, and it's going to be a really running back heavy year up in Detroit with Gibbs and Montgomery. A lot of talent in that backfield. But I ended up grabbing a receiver, grabbed my third wide receiver. I always talk about my 5 running back, 5 receiver rule. So I add another receiver, and you know me, I can't really go wrong with some Deontay Johnson. Obviously, last year was pretty bad when it comes to the touchdowns. None of them he had. He had 0 touchdown catches, and obviously that bumped down his value, from last season. But if I could grab him in the 7th round, he's going to be the number 1 guy. It really can't get much worse than the touchdown volume from last year. The volume, on the other hand, was spectacular. Yeah, I mean, it was right up there towards 100 receptions last season. A lot of targets on the board for Deontay Johnson. I think it's going to be most likely the same when it comes to that volume, even with Allen Robinson coming in, George Pickens right behind him. I think Deontay's in for another really strong year, and he'll get those touchdowns, and I'll take him as my 3rd wide receiver if I can get him.
Yeah, I think the floor is high for Deontay, especially just from the sense of, yeah, you mentioned it. He didn't score any touchdowns, and so I think it was a good pick there. As we continue to go break down through here, we come down to the next turn, and Zach, just kind of guide us through what went to the Freiermuth pick.
I needed a tight end, and a lot of those tight ends went off the board. Kittle went off the board, and a couple of other guys, and Freiermuth, Pitts was another guy that went off the board already, and Goddard. And Freiermuth, in my mind, was the better option of the two between him and Evan Ingram. I thought those were the two that I was really thinking about. And in the 8th round, I'll grab Freiermuth as well. I talk about the volume with Deontay Johnson. I think the volume's there with Pat Freiermuth. A very big target share for the tight ends in Pittsburgh each and every year. And there was last year as well with a young quarterback in Kenny Pickett. I think it's going to be maybe some more of the same. And I'm comfortable. I know the floor of Pat Freiermuth, and I'm comfortable taking him as my tight end with the other guys around him on my roster.
Yeah, so then there were a couple intriguing names for me there. I was going to grab a pass catcher. I knew I was going to grab a tight end as well, hoping that Evan Ingram fell. He did. And so I got Evan Ingram. We spoke about the impact that he could have this year. And I took one out of your playbook, as I told you, with a guy that you're very high on, Evan Ingram. And then it came down to the receiver. And for me, it was between Mike Williams and Brandon Ayuk. Mike Williams, he wasn't there. Brandon Ayuk, he was wide receiver 23, 8 touchdowns. He was 11th among wide receivers. He's intriguing because I think that it's a guy that was slipping in a lot of these drafts, but he really shouldn't have been. I'm not quite sure. I think the quarterback not being Jimmy Garoppolo kind of, took his value down. But at the same time, he's a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside for me if he can keep scoring those touchdowns. So I was pretty happy taking that spot. And continuing through that next round in the 9th, Zach, you took Tyler Lockett there. That's a pretty big fall there for Tyler Lockett.
Tyler Lockett was ranked in the mid-50s starting the draft, Brett. And I was so happy that Tyler Lockett fell to me. I needed another wide receiver to kind of back up those other two in Watson and Johnson. That's really what I was looking for, best available at that time. And for Tyler Lockett to be there, I'm not high on Tyler Lockett this year, but I'll take him as my 4th wide receiver any day of the week. This guy was wide receiver 13 last year. And people are saying that it's going to be crowded with JSN coming in. That's very true, but that doesn't mean Tyler Lockett still can't get those points, especially for a 9th rounder where I was able to grab him.
Yeah, and for those just tuning in, he has Diggs, Christian Watson, and Deontay Johnson. So, yeah, I think to have Tyler Lockett, that's a pretty good move there. And, yeah, he was one of those guys I was considering there in the 8th round, 8-9 turn. Had I taken him, I would have been taking 2 wides. I, kind of wanted that tight end, though. And so, for me, I passed on Tyler Lockett. But luckily, you were able to get him there as a couple quarterbacks went right before, A.J. Dillon as well. Jumping to the 10th round, though, and it was kind of the round of the running backs. And you grabbed one, and I grabbed one as well.
Yeah, I love Antonio Gibson this year. I drafted Brian Robinson in another league, and I like both of them. I see the upside on both of them. Brian Robinson as the pure running back in Washington this season, but Antonio Gibson as a PPR guy. I mean, this is a PPR league. I think he's going to get a big load of receptions out of the backfield, especially with with a young quarterback in Sam Howell, most likely going to be the QB1. A ton of checkdowns I'm expecting. I think Antonio Gibson is going to get those points, and to have him as my fourth running back and maybe a guy who can slide in while Kamara is out due to suspension, I'll take that with Antonio Gibson in the 10th.
Yeah, I think that was also good value for you there at the 10th round. For me, when it came to the 10th, 11th pick, I think it was all just about the handcuffs, protecting your assets. And so I grabbed Zach Charbonnet knowing that I had Kenneth Walker on my team. We spoke about that before, and just, listen, if there's the upside of one of these two guys getting hurt, the other one goes off, that's okay. I kind of risk it there by protecting in the 10th round. Obviously, you don't hope that one of them gets hurt, but we'll figure out what the roles are pretty early, I would assume. And there's the potential that both of these guys go off as they kind of lean into the run. So I figured why not? And in the case that one of them did go down, at least I had the other one just in case. As if there is one of them going, or only one of them playing, I think that they're a workhorse back one way or the other. And so to be able to have that guy, I thought that was important. The next one came down to Elijah Mitchell. Obviously, I picked Christian McCaffrey. You always want to grab your handcuff just to make sure that you protect that asset. And then for Zach, you got Adam Thielen there. And again, this is the conversation we've had for weeks about how low is Adam Thielen going. You grab him there in the 11th round.
Yeah, and obviously there's the question mark of who's going to be the number one. Is it DJ Chark or is it Adam Thielen? I just look at the touchdowns, and there is no argument against Adam Thielen when it comes to touchdowns, the red zone, all of that stuff. He's going to get his target share in this offense with a young quarterback in Bryce Young, who's going to go to the reliable target in certain situations. And I think Adam Thielen, as my number 5 wide receiver, I mean, I'll take that in the 11th round. We're getting into the stage of backups, and to grab Adam Thielen that low, I know he's ranked that low, but we've talked about it. I rank him a little bit higher than that, and I'll take him to sit on my bench and maybe start to boom 1 or 2 weeks.
Yeah, and just to give some context, this is a 2 wide receiver league as well as 2 running backs and a 1 quarterback. And so you do have a flex spot, 1 flex spot. So you can start 3 wides if you want to at a time. So this is really a very low risk pick for you as a backup here in Adam Thielen. And I don't know that you can really go wrong, especially as you're starting to get some of those bye weeks there. It might be one of those reliable targets there in the red zone. And we spoke about that at nauseum of Adam Thielen and how low he's going. That's an excellent pick there for you at 11. Then you go down to 12 and you pick your handcuff.
Yeah, and I could have got him a little bit later. I understand that, but I talk about my rule: 5 running backs, 5 receivers. I completed it in the 12th round with Josh Allen as my quarterback and Pat Freiermuth as my tight end. But I filled that goal of 5 and 5, and Tyler Algier could be my 5th running back. I'm comfortable with that, especially with who I got ahead of him in Gibson, Kamara, Gibbs, and Bijan. And to protect Bijan in case something happens, I think Tyler Algier is the guy. I think he proved that towards the later stages of last season. There's still the question of, is Cordarrelle Patterson going to still have that role as the number 2? I think it's Tyler Algier behind Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, and so as we continue now through this 12th round, and, we got to that turn again. And for me, I like taking that quarterback at that 12, 13 round turn. Just from the sense of you want to have one of those stronger backups. I always like having one of the stronger backups over my competition. And so for me, it was Aaron Rodgers. And, Aaron Rodgers isn't what he was the last couple of years from a fantasy perspective, not running the ball, scoring, just under 20 points a game. But he was solid. Listen, I'm not going to lie. I was looking at Anthony Richardson at that spot just because I felt like, okay, having Mahomes on my team, I can take the risk of potentially getting Anthony Richardson. And if he ends up being really good, there's that trade value, perspective. But I just went for the solid guy. Aaron Rodgers for me was the no-brainer pick once Richardson was off the board. And then I took upside here. It was Jameson Williams. For me, it was more about that it's the 13th round. I already had 4 wides, and so I'm taking my 5th wide. And yeah, he's going to sit 6 games, but there's a potential that he can end up in that upper echelon of wides when he comes back. And so why not take the chance in round 13?
Yeah, definitely fair. And grabbing a guy in Jameson Williams, even with the suspension, I mean, throw him on the bench. He's your 5th wide receiver. You have guys ahead of him that are going to be in your lineup in that span.
Yeah, so then Zach, you went out and you took a defense right away, which was a little surprising for what you normally do. But at the same time, I mean, you have the advantage over the rest of the guys.
Yeah, and I could have gone a ton of different ways here. I could have taken my backup quarterback or my backup tight end or maybe grab another running back or receiver. But I felt comfortable. It was the 13th round at that point. Why not get that advantage over the other teams and grab the top defense? In my mind, it's San Francisco. I had them last year. I drafted them in another league last week. I'll go with them again. I think they're going to be really strong this year. And like I said, grabbing that advantage, it's the 13th round at this point. And I don't know if there's a wrong pick in the 13th round.
Yeah, I don't know that you could really go wrong in the 13th round just because a lot of them are those flyers that you're kind of taking and hoping for upside. And for you, though, when you did take your backup quarterback there in round 14, it was a guy that we spoke a lot about how, it can't get any worse.
Yeah, and I felt comfortable picking San Francisco in the round before because Russell Wilson was on my mind from the beginning. I looked at the bye week of Josh Allen. It's week 13, and Russell Wilson is going up against the Houston Texans. Obviously, that's probably going to be the 1 week I play Russell Wilson with Josh Allen as my quarterback, and I have an easy matchup when my top quarterback's on the bye week. I still have a really good shot with Russell Wilson going up against a weak defense down in Houston.
Yeah, and so I think that taking Russ there, again, smart pick, and it's another thing that the fans at home should really take, which is take your starting quarterback, figure out what bye week he's on, and then jump onto the NFL schedule and figure out, well, who's playing who that week. I think that's a really smart way to go about picking your backup quarterback, especially when you feel like you have a solid one. You're probably going to start your starter for basically the entire season minus that 1 week.
Yep, definitely.
So for me now at the 14-15 turn, I wanted to grab a defense. None of them went. I felt like I could still get that kind of advantage. So I do grab the Bills there. I think that they're going to be a solid defense this year. And then I took upside. And again, it was because that entire strategy changed at the beginning of the draft where those running backs kind of went early. It was like, okay, so now how do I protect my assets? And it was really just about the chasing the upside. So I take Devon Achane. Not sure what he's going to be this year. I'm excited to find out. But at the same time, they've spoken so highly about him. And so I figured why not at that spot when you really see there's not a lot of running backs got taken at the back end of the draft. And I knew that a lot of teams were going to try to take other positions. And so I figured why not grab him before somebody else tries to take the late round flyer on him.
Yeah, definitely. And grabbing maybe a long shot, a late round flyer on Devon Achane, you can never go wrong. He's a rookie and could make a real big impact in Miami in a crowded backfield this season.
Yeah. So now for you took a guy that we've also spoken about on this podcast, a sleeper there in Okonkwo.
Yeah, Chig Okonkwo, the Tennessee tight end, and I have Pat Freiermuth as my number 1, but I took a sleeper here and a guy who I think can probably have the upside of maybe top 12. I think it's up there. He could definitely be up there in an offense that Ryan Tannehill's still trying to figure things out now with DeAndre Hopkins now coming in. Will Derrick Henry get some receptions out of the backfield like he did last year? I think the second pass catcher after Hopkins is Chigakonkwo. And if I could take him as my backup tight end, I definitely feel comfortable with that in the 15th round.
Yeah, and the other thing you kind of notice, like some kickers like mixed in there. You and I didn't really take a kicker until the very, very last round. Just kind of guide what went through that process.
Yeah, I kind of just value other positions. I value actually a defense more than I value a kicker. And obviously you see that I took a defense 5 rounds ahead of a kicker, and obviously a lot went into that. I do think that at the kicker position, I don't know if there's a real there's tiers obviously at the top. There's the top guys with Tucker and McPherson and Carlson, but I feel like everybody after that, you can really never go wrong. And it's kind of, if their guy's bad for a couple weeks, then you switch to another guy. I think that's how it's going. I think it's a lot easier to do that with a kicker rather than a defense.
Yeah, I think that the gap is not that wide, especially as you had just explained, like after that top tier, which you're almost paying a premium for because, you're picking a guy, like you picked the top defense the same round that the top kicker went. But I mean, Jamal Williams was picked in that same round, and Jameson Williams was picked in that same round, guys who could somehow provide some more than what a kicker might. And so for me, I agree. I think that with the gap not being that wide, why take the premium on paying for a position that's pretty much going to score the same as the rest of them?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and so now we get into your last pick, and yeah, you didn't take a kicker here, but you did take your sleeper ahead of the rest of the gang, and it was Rashee Rice.
Yeah, and another late round flyer. He could end up being the number one in Kansas City. You never know. A lot of signals point towards Sky Moore as the number one in Kansas City this year. But if Rashee Rice has a couple good weeks, then he could be my 6th wide receiver. You take a late round shot on him.
Yeah, and so why not? And again, this is a guy that Pat Mahomes requested that they draft. I think that speaks volumes as well. And so we spoke about it from a dynasty perspective. You also grabbed him in dynasty, correct?
Yes, I did. And obviously favorable now heading into redraft.
Yeah. And so, it is a guy that you were very high on, obviously. And so why not take the shot? And again, if you end up dropping him a couple weeks in, no one's going to fault you because it was your last position player.
Yeah, exactly.
So for me on that 16-17 turn, it was quite simple. Grab a kicker, obviously. And so I took Younghoe Koo. A solid guy. He misses a bunch, but at the same time, there's also those weeks where he scores a lot and he plays in a dome. The quarterback situation's a little iffy right now in Atlanta. And so figured, there could be some times where he gets called out to kick field goals as opposed to extra points, which obviously that equates to more fantasy points. And so I was comfortable taking Younghoe Koo there. And then I took Kadarius Toney. And the reason that I didn't pick the kicker last was so that I could actually say, hey, I picked Kadarius Toney in the last round of this entire draft. How crazy is that? This is a guy that was the touted number one receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. And yeah, he's banged up right now. He just had surgery, but the reports came out this weekend. He's going to be ready for week 1. And if that's the case, listen, the sky's the limit. It's the same thing that you just said with Rashee Rice. With that quarterback throwing you the ball, sky's the limit. And so for me, it was, can I take Kadarius Toney in the last round? And so I ended up taking my kicker with the second to last pick just so that I could say Kadarius Toney is the last round pick. And if he hits, then I hit on my last round pick.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a long shot, but Kadarius Toney could be the number one. There's still a ton of question marks in Kansas City. And as long as he's healthy and staying on the field, I mean, the sky's the limit for a guy like Kadarius Toney in KC.
So now just guide us through your last pick there, and it's Greg the Leg.
Yeah, it's Greg the Leg. And the reason I took him was because I think there's going to be a lot of touchdowns. I think they're going to be on that side of the field a lot with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback and a lot of talent at running back. Like, they're going to move down the field very easily. Obviously, not every time they're going to get it into the end zone. I think they're going to get it into the end zone a lot. And from that, I'll get extra points from the extra points from Greg Zuerlein, and I'm fine with that. I feel like if things start to struggle and he's getting towards the lower points of kickers, then I can drop him and go another way. But I forgot to talk about in my last pick, Tyler Bass. He was a guy I looked at, obviously went the pick before me. I was like, okay, I'm going to take Rashee Rice and then take a kicker in the next round. Felt comfortable with Zuerlein in the end with the options available.
Yeah, and I remember you told me that you were going to pick Bass at that spot, and we waited the entire round. It came to the pick before they announced the pick, and we let out a big ah. And so, to be able to stack your kicker with your quarterback, obviously you already have the receiver stack, but to be able to get those points with the quarterback, that would have been fun, and it is something that is fun that I would recommend. Obviously, I couldn't get Bucker. Just based on the fact that he went way too early for me. But at the same time, I would have agreed if you grabbed Tyler Bass, that would have been a good move there for you.
Yeah, definitely.
And so now let's just break down one more pick here because it really had you and I after the draft absolutely confused of why this guy was still out there. Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins was picked 4th to last in this entire draft. Zach, why did he last so long, number one? But number two, what kind of value is he getting in round 17?
I have no clue why he dropped this far. The only reason I didn't take Kirk Cousins when I was on the clock was because he had the same bye week as Josh Allen. So I was like, oh, okay, I got to pass up on him. But the fact that he went this low, I took Kirk Cousins as my backup to Patrick Mahomes in my other league in the 13th round. I took him in another league. I think he's going to be really good this year. I think he's fringe top 10. Like, he's right on the border of QB1 in fantasy. The fact that he went this low, I think people may be missing out on a guy like Kirk Cousins, who has Justin Jefferson in a pass-heavy offense. I mean, it's everything you would have wanted in a quarterback. And the fact that he dropped that far, good job on Ryan being able to grab him.
Yeah, I was so confused of why Kirk Cousins lasted this long. And the only thing I could really point to is that everybody kind of grabbed their backup quarterback pretty early and then forgot about the entire position. Nobody wanted to grab a third guy. But yeah, props to Ryan there for grabbing him in round 17 because, yeah, like you said, the upside might not be as high as some of those upper echelon guys, but he could be a top 10 quarterback. And we've seen that in recent years where he has those receivers there. Now, obviously, they add Jordan Addison, and Jordan Addison's clear and he's ready to go after his incident. Obviously, you pair that with KJ Osborne, Jefferson. I think there's a really good chance now that Kirk Cousins could finish up in that top 15, if not top 10.
Yeah, and a pass-heavy offense that I feel like they're going to give Madison a lesser workload of what they gave Dalvin Cook all those years.
Yeah, and so any final thoughts on just your team in general and the direction you went and how you came out of this draft?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't one of my traditional drafts, I would say. I usually don't take suspended guys like I did in Alvin Kamara. I usually maybe wait a little bit longer on quarterback, but I saw the stack and other people looking at Josh Allen, so I had to grab him that early. I really like my team based on the running backs. I think that really stood out from the beginning with Bijan, Gibbs, and Kamara. I think I have a really solid trio there with those three. And to be able to back that up with a quarterback wide receiver stack, I think my starting lineup is really ready to roll this year.
Yeah, so for me, I agree. Like, I never take suspended players. And if Jason Williams wasn't there in round 13, I wouldn't have taken him this year, just based on the fact that you're waiting so long for him to actually get some game action. But, take him there in round 13, that was pretty obvious for me. For me, it was pretty easy. It was about getting those high-end talents. I had Caffrey, I had Pat Mahomes, and then it was about just building from there with the wides. A.J. Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Drake London, Brandon Ayuk. I think that there's a pretty good core there with the potential that those two guys that I picked at the end there, Jameson Williams and Kadarius Toney, there's the potential that one of those two guys comes into that tier and passes a couple of the guys that are in that top 8 round of pick. And so for me, that's kind of where I went. Again, scared as hell about the running back situation after Christian McCaffrey. But that said, I still got David Montgomery, protected the asset with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. So hopefully one of them goes off or leads the way, and it's not just a complete 50-50 split, because obviously there won't be that much of fantasy value in that case. And then taking the upside on A-Chain, I think that just was a late round flyer for me. But, to be able to have that high-end talent, and then obviously we just spoke about the importance of grabbing a defense. I thought it was important to grab Buffalo, just because you're kind of chasing those interceptions. For me personally, I think that chasing the pick sixes is how you win at defense. And so to grab a team like Buffalo, a team that has a great secondary, scores a lot of pick sixes, I think that was important for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the same went into me picking the defense. I feel like there's an edge from the top defense down towards the bottom, and San Francisco on top of that first tier. I think it's very important to grab those guys, especially it's the 13th round at that point, and it's worth grabbing a guy rather than maybe a late round flyer.
Any candidates for sleeper of the draft?
Any candidates for sleeper of the draft? I told you Jerry Jeudy is a really good pick in round 5. I think that's a little bit later than I expected him to go. There's a couple of guys. Joe Burrow in the 7th round. I would probably say Burrow in the 7th round. I think for a guy who's, I would say, at the top part of the second tier of quarterbacks, I think he's number 4. To get him in the 7th round, we value quarterbacks. I think Joe Burrow is a steal there.
Yeah, I thought that I agree with that. I think it is Joe Burrow, and I think it just comes down to look who he was picked after. I mean, it was Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields right before that. To be able to settle for Joe Burrow as your guy, I thought that was really impressive there. And who was that? That was Josh. And so I thought that was a great move there by Josh. To be able to grab that solid guy, and before that with Jamar Chase, we spoke about that a little bit. Potential there, and whether you take Fields over Burrow, I would take Burrow at that spot. I know that you agreed with that, but I think that, the Jeudy pick, yeah, I agree, to be able to grab him there at the end of round 5. I was considering him there at that round 4-5 turn as one of those receivers picked, for him to slip to the end of round 5. Great pickup there for Jared.
Yeah, it just shows how much this league values running backs. That a guy like Jerry Jeudy, who could be really strong this year, top 20 of the wide receivers, falls because those running backs are jumping up the draft board.
Yeah, and so, the other takeaway from this was exactly what we said to you last week, and we said it again at the beginning of this. The running backs go quick, and that well dries up pretty quickly. So the advice that I would take out of here, especially after you kind of see what my team ended up like, grab those running backs early. I didn't really have any regrets because it was just kind of how the board fell. But, had one of those 3rd round running backs fell into the 4th round, and been available, or one of those middle 4th fell back, I might have felt a little more comfortable grabbing them there and packing the wides just after that.
Yeah, I could agree on that. And grabbing those running backs, one of my tips heading into redraft season.
Did you have any regrets heading out of this draft?
I feel like I could have maybe grabbed a receiver a little bit earlier when it comes to after Stephon Diggs. I feel like Watson and Johnson are good. I'm hoping that one of them kind of booms. And Tyler Lockett, I kind of backed it up with those two. But I feel like as my wide receiver too, there's still a question mark of who it's going to be behind Stephon Diggs, because I know what I'm going to get with Diggs. I don't really know what I'm going to get with the other 3.
Yeah. All right. So there's our breakdown there of our redraft. Zach, I think we did pretty well though. And hopefully our teams end up doing well in the standings, but just to kind of give a perspective of what's going on from the redraft perspective and some of these mock drafts, and maybe we'll do one online live on one of these shows and kind of give the viewers a perspective of what the trend is as we start to head further and further into training camp and towards the NFL season. Zach, we got some preseason football coming up this week.
Yeah, very exciting stuff. And football is almost here. We're less than a month away, Brett.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to believe, and Hard Knocks actually coming out tonight, and so excited for that and excited to break down some of these preseason games with you next week. And until the next one, I'm Brett Malamud signing off with Zach Malamud.